The garden was alive with color and celebration. Balloons in gold and navy floated gently above the fence line, catching the early afternoon sun. A jazz quartet played near the gazebo, the music weaving through the crowd like a breeze. Laughter rose from every corner, aunts balancing paper plates, cousins arguing over card games, grandkids chasing each other through the grass. It was my son David's 50th birthday, and by all appearances, it was a perfect day. I stood near the back patio, watching it all unfold with a soft, bittersweet smile. For years, I hadn't been a part of this. Not the birthdays, the holidays, the dinners. David and I had fallen out nearly 15 years ago, after a heated argument that neither of us knew how to come back from. Pride built walls between us. Time let them harden. But a few months ago, out of nowhere, he called me. Just to check in, he said. One call led to another, and soon we were meeting for lunch. Then coffee. Then he invited me to this, his big celebration. A milestone I'd never thought I'd witness. So I stood there, grateful, quiet, letting the sun warm my shoulders, letting the music wash away the years. But something didn't feel right. I'd caught David glancing at his watch too many times. Not the casual kind of check. It was like he was waiting for something. And every so often, he'd step away from his own party to take a phone call, his voice low, tense, clipped. When he returned, he smiled like nothing happened, but there was a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. I chalked it up to stress. A man with business, family, and maybe too much pressure to host a perfect day. Still, the unease lingered. Then I saw Emma, his daughter, my granddaughter. 17 now, always the bright spark in the room. But today, she was different. She stood near the lemonade table, arms folded tightly, eyes darting from face to face as if she were looking for someone or watching someone. When I waved at her, she gave me the briefest smile, then quickly turned away. That wasn't like her. Normally, she'd run up and wrap me in a hug. But she looked distracted, guarded, anxious. I watched her for a while, then turned back to the yard where guests sang happy birthday as David cut the enormous cake. Camera phones rose in the air. People clapped. The moment passed, but my thoughts didn't. Something was staring underneath the surface of this beautiful celebration, and I couldn't explain why, but I felt it watching me. The party was in full swing now. Guests posed in front of the balloon arch, plates piled high with barbecue and sides. Someone turned the speakers up, and a playlist of David's favorite songs pulsed through the backyard. Laughter, clinking glasses, distant chatter. The air was thick with joy, or at least the performance of it. I had just stepped toward the refreshment table, thinking I might grab a ginger ale, when I saw her. Emma. She came out of nowhere, weaving through people with urgency in her steps and fear written plainly across her face. Her hands gripped the sides of her sundress, and her eyes scanned the yard like she was running from something. "Grandpa," she said breathlessly, grabbing my wrist. "You have to leave. Right now." I blinked at her, startled. Her grip was tight. Her voice shook. "What? Emma, what are you?" "Please," she interrupted, pulling me gently toward the side gate. "Just go. I can't explain. But you need to leave. Right now." My heart thudded in my chest. I looked into her face, and that's when I saw it. Not just panic, but heartbreak. Her eyes were glossy, her lips trembling like she was on the edge of something too big for words. I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would I?" She just shook her head. "Trust me, Grandpa. Please, go, now." I hesitated. Everything in me wanted to stay, to press her for answers, to demand to know what was happening. But something about the way she said it, not just the urgency, but the plea, made my bones ache with recognition. This wasn't about teenage nerves or some social drama. This was Faye, real, raw Faye. So I nodded, slowly, and reached for my coat that was draped over the chair. Without a word to anyone, without even glancing back toward the party, I walked out the side gate and down the quiet neighborhood street. My footsteps echoed on the pavement. My heart pounded. I didn't know what I was walking away from, but I knew this much. Emma had seen something, and I had trusted her. And somehow, I knew that trust had just saved my life. The road ahead was quiet, too quiet for the noise still rattling inside me. As I drove away from the estate, the laughter and music began to fade behind me, replaced by the soft hum of my tires on asphalt. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to come running after me. But no one did. Just the long stretch of neighborhood road and the silhouette of the house behind me, growing smaller with every turn. The further I got, the more the feeling deepened, a strange blend of relief and dread. Why had Emma been so afraid? What had she seen? And why did it feel like I'd just slipped past something heavy? I pulled over by a quiet park and sat there for a moment, engine humming. Then, almost without thinking, I pulled out my phone and dialed an old number. "Dale," I said when the voice answered. "It's me." Dale was a retired police lieutenant. We'd known each other since our factory days before he joined the force. We weren't close anymore, not like we used to be, but some instincts don't fade. And tonight, mine told me I needed someone who could think through fear. "I need to ask you something weird," I continued. "If someone, a teenager, maybe, told you to leave a party with no explanation, said it like it was urgent, would you take it seriously?" There was a pause on the other end, then Dale's voice dropped. "Who told you to leave?" "My granddaughter, Emma. She was scared, shaking, told me to go. So I did." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Call me if anything else happens. And get some sleep. Trust your gut. If something felt wrong, it probably was." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thanks." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My room was still, but my mind wasn't. Every image of the party replayed. David's forced smile, his secret calls, Emma's trembling hands. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. At 3:17 a.m., the phone rang. I fumbled in the dark and answered. "Hello." It was Dale. "Turn on the news," he said, his voice grave. I did. There it was, glowing on the screen in the dim room. Breaking: fire at Westbrook Estate. 2 guests hospitalized. Electrical fault suspected. Arson not ruled out. My breath left me. The footage showed flashing lights, fire trucks, smoke rising above the garden I'd stood in just hours before. I leaned forward, my hand gripping the arm of the chair. It was the same house. My son's house. The place where music and laughter had echoed, now blackened, burned. 2 injured. Arson suspected. My blood turned to ice. What would have happened if I hadn't left? Would I have been one of the ones still inside when the flames rose? Would I have made it out? The screen faded to a reporter summarizing emergency responses. I didn't hear a word. I was staring at a truth too big to ignore. Emma didn't just ask me to leave. She saved me from something far worse than I could have imagined. And someone, maybe someone close to me, had known exactly what they were doing. The houses blurred past as I drove, but my thoughts stayed tethered to the backyard I'd just walked away from. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Emma chasing after me, or worse, someone watching. The farther I got, the more unease settled into my bones. There was no traffic, just silence, the kind that whispers too much. Relief washed over me in waves, but it never came alone. It brought something else with it, Faye. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that murmurs quietly inside your chest. Something is very, very wrong. At the first red light, I pulled over and grabbed my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found his name, Dale Rivers. Dale wasn't just an old friend. He was a retired lieutenant. We'd shared more than a few beers and regrets over the years. And if anyone knew how to smell danger before it bit, it was him. "Hey, Dale," I said when he picked up. "Well, I'll be. Haven't heard that voice in years." He chuckled, then paused. "You sound off. Something happened." I told him everything, from the moment Emma grabbed my wrist to her urgent whisper, "Grandpa, you have to leave here. Now." She didn't explain. Dale asked. "Not a word," I said. Just begged me to trust her. He was quiet for a few seconds. "Did you see anything strange at the party?" David was odd. Kept checking his watch. Took a bunch of phone calls. Looked nervous. Dale exhaled slowly. "Don't go back there tonight." Just in case. If she told you to leave, I'd trust that. Something's wrong, isn't it? I asked. Let's just say you were wise to walk away. We ended the call with a quiet understanding between two men who'd seen enough in life to know when silence meant danger. That night, I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me, listening to the house creak and groan like it knew something I didn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma's face, those wide, pleading eyes, and the tremble in her voice. At 3:04 a.m., the shrill buzz of my phone shattered the stillness. It was Dale again. Turn on the news, he said. I fumbled for the remote and flicked the screen to Channel 7. Breaking news. Fire at Westbrook Estate, 2 injured. Electrical fault suspected. Arson not ruled out. There it was, my son's house, engulfed in smoke, flames licking the sky. Emergency lights bounced off the walls as firefighters dragged hoses across the lawn. Reporters stood wrapped in blankets, interviewing dazed guests. I leaned closer. It was the same yard I'd stood in just hours earlier, sipping ginger ale and watching kids chase balloons. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Just stared as they said 2 guests had been hospitalized. Smoke inhalation. 1 in serious condition. The cause of the fire was under investigation. Early signs suggested faulty wiring, but accelerant was found near the back porch. Someone had placed it there. My heart thudded. I whispered to the empty room, what would have happened if I stayed? And suddenly, the quietness in Emma's voice earlier, the urgency, made perfect sense. She hadn't just warned me. She had saved me. From what? I still didn't know. But whatever it was, it had come wrapped in birthday cake and champagne toasts. And it had nearly worked. The next morning arrived quietly. The sky overcast like even the sun hadn't found the courage to rise. I sat on the porch, a lukewarm cup of coffee in my hand, watching a squirrel chase its shadow across the railing. The events of the night still hadn't settled. The fire, the news broadcast, the ache of uncertainty that had replaced sleep. Then I heard the soft knock on the door. Emma stood there, still in the same clothes from a party. Her eyes were tired, rimmed red, but she didn't cry. She looked older than she had just a day before, as if some innocence had peeled away overnight. I figured you'd be awake, she said quietly. I didn't say anything, just nodded and opened the door wider. She stepped in, hugged me quickly, then pulled back. Can we go for a walk? We walked along the trail behind my neighborhood, a narrow, wooded path lined with wildflowers and soft dirt. The kind of place you go to think, or to say things you're afraid to say indoors. For a while, we didn't speak, just the sound of birds and our footsteps. Then Emma broke the silence. I heard them talking, Dad and Uncle Rick, in the garage. I stopped walking. She kept her eyes on the path ahead. I was going to the freezer for ice cream, she said, but the door was open just enough, and I heard my name. She swallowed. They were laughing. Something about how it was all going to work out. How the payout would cover everything. Uncle Rick said, just make sure the old man stays inside when the time comes. And Dad said, he won't suspect a thing. The wind rustled the leaves above us, but everything else fell silent. I think they were planning something. Grandpa, she continued, her voice shaking. I think the fire wasn't an accident. And I think they wanted you to be in it. I turned to her slowly. But why? Why would your father? She looked up at me, her eyes heavy. Dad's in serious debt. Gambling. Bad business deals. The house, the cars, none of it's really his. I found papers. And then I saw the policy. I blinked. Policy? She nodded. Life insurance. In your name. Huge. It went active last month. My breath caught. Everything around me swirled. The trees, the dirt, even the steady beat of my own heart. I felt something inside me fracture. The kind of break that comes not from a single blow, but from the weight of disbelief crushing you slowly. My son, my only son, and he tried to make me disappear. Full money. Emma reached out and took my hand. I didn't know what else to do. I just knew I had to get you out. I squeezed her hand, barely able to speak. I had raised a son who valued dollars over blood. But I had also been blessed with a granddaughter who knew what love, real love, looked like. And that was the only truth I could hold on to. The house was still again that evening. Emma had gone home. My phone was silent. The world outside moved on. Joggers passing, sprinklers hissing, birds calling out as the day dimmed. But I sat in my armchair, lost somewhere between memory and mourning. I stared at a photo on the mantel. David at age 8, standing in front of a cardboard fort we'd built together in the backyard. His smile was wide, genuine. His arm was slung across my neck like I was his whole world. Back then, maybe I was. After his mother passed, it was just the two of us. A quiet house, a toddler with questions, and me, fumbling through grief and fatherhood, pretending I had it under control. I worked long shifts at the plant, then came home and tried to be fun, patient, kind. Some nights I succeeded. Others, I failed miserably. There were evenings I raised my voice when I should have just listened. Mornings I left too early, missing the chance to pack his lunch or see him off to school. But I tried. God knows, I tried. He always had the best of what I could offer. Not always in money, but in effort. Piano lessons when he asked, a second-hand bike when he saved enough, a surprise camping trip one summer that left us both sunburned and laughing around a fire. Still, there were signs, small ones. The way he blamed other kids when he lost a game. How he once stole a neighbor's toy and cried when caught. Not from guilt, but because he hated being shamed. How he could charm people effortlessly, and then turn cold the moment things didn't go his way. Back then, I chalked it up to childhood stubbornness. I believed he'd grow out of it, become better than I was. Smarter, kinder, and in some ways, he did grow up into a man who wore nice suits, built a company, had a family of his own. But something had rotted beneath the surface, and now that rot had reached for me. As I sat there, the guilt crept in like a fog. Did I miss it? Did I make him this way? The disbelief was louder. Could my son, my boy, really want me dead? A father's heart bends in many ways. But tonight, mine was breaking. I spent the next morning staring at the insurance papers Emma had managed to photograph, the ones her father never thought she'd find. His signature was there, bold and shameless. My name, as the insured, circled in red by her trembling teenage hand. The beneficiary? David himself. Still, part of me resisted believing it. Maybe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe he just panicked and filed something he didn't mean to act on. Maybe. But then I remembered Emma's face, and how close I came to being inside that house when it burned. I needed the truth, not the version that guilt painted or grief excused, but the truth in black and white. So I made a call. Warren Bristow, said the man on the other end, his voice low and clipped. Discreet, efficient, expensive. You still good with that? Better than being dead, I replied. Warren was an old contact of Dale's, a private investigator with a knack for digging where others wouldn't dare. I gave him everything. Names, dates, addresses, the photo of the insurance form, even my suspicions about the fire. He didn't flinch, just said, give me 5 days. He called me back in 3. I've got a folder, he said. You'll want to sit down for this one. When he arrived, he handed me a thick envelope. I pulled out photos, financial records, a printed policy document, and a report with a stamped statement from an anonymous whistleblower, a contractor who'd been hired weeks before the party to install a remote ignition system disguised as part of the house's existing lighting automation. It triggered at 3 a.m. They hadn't expected me to leave early. They'd timed the fire for the middle of the night, when I'd be sleeping in the guest room. But I wasn't, because Emma had pulled me out. Warren's report also showed David had defaulted on over $280,000 in gambling debts in the last 14 months. Loans from dangerous people, hidden bank withdrawals, emergency cash transfers to his brother Rick. It all lined up. I leaned back in my chair, letting the papers fall onto the table. The walls of the room suddenly felt too tight, the air too thick. Everything Emma had said was true. And now, I had proof. Warren looked at me, his eyes steady. I can refer this to someone at the station. Quietly. No headlines. They'll reopen the case without tipping your son off. I nodded. Do it. The next morning, the investigation was reopened under a sealed order. Quiet interviews began. A sample from the charred remains of the living room confirmed what Warren had found: synthetic accelerant, a small delay trigger inside the smart lamp. It was no accident. Meanwhile, David stood in front of news cameras with a rehearsed look of grief on his face. "We're so grateful no lives were lost," he told a reporter. "The material things don't matter. What matters is family." He even managed to shed a tear. People hugged him. Neighbors dropped off food. He played the grieving host like he was born for it. And behind it all, beneath the sympathy cards and somber tones, stood a man who had plotted the death of his own father. For money. But this time, the truth wasn't just whispered. It had teeth, and it was coming for him. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, a day like any other in the city. The sun was out. Traffic droned. No headlines screamed. No sirens wailed. Just a quiet knock at David's office door. Two plainclothes officers entered with calm authority. "David Harper," one asked. David stood from behind his glass desk, confused but cordial. "Yes, that's me. You'll need to come with us." "For what?" "We'd prefer to discuss that downtown." There was no scene. No cuffs in the lobby. Just a silent walk to the elevator. A few curious glances from his assistant. And then, nothing but the click of the car door shutting behind him. Emma told me later that she sat in the back of the hearing room, not to celebrate, but to witness. To face the truth with her own eyes. David looked calm at first, even smug. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, he smiled politely at the officers and leaned back as though the entire thing were a misunderstanding. But then they started presenting the evidence. First, the insurance policy, $3 million, activated only weeks before the fire. Signed by him. Backdated. Beneficiary, himself. Second, the financial reports, records of his gambling debts, phone transfers to Rick, payment receipts for home improvement consulting made out to a shell company tied to the installation of the ignition device. Third, the forensic report, traces of accelerant, tampered wiring, and the charred casing of the timed ignition switch, all consistent with deliberate arson. And then came the witness statement. An anonymous contractor who confessed he had been hired to install a remote activation light system with a backup ignition mechanism and was paid in untraceable cash. By the time the prosecutor listed the charges, attempted murder, insurance fraud, first-degree arson, and conspiracy to commit financial harm, David's confident expression had cracked. Emma watched it happen, the moment her father's face changed. Not from fear, but from the realization that he had underestimated them all. That the man he had tried to erase hadn't just survived, he had risen. The judge denied bail. When Emma returned home that night, she didn't cry. She sat beside me, silent, and laid her hand over mine. "He didn't even look for me," she whispered. "Not once." I nodded, my eyes fixed on the fireplace. He looked for the wrong things. Justice hadn't come with noise. It hadn't shouted or paraded. It had arrived like Emma had that day. Quiet, steady, and just in time. In the months that followed, something unexpected happened. Not the kind of twist life throws at you to test your strength, but a gentler one. One born of healing. Emma and I grew closer than we'd ever been. There were no walls between us anymore. No roles to play. Just two people who had been through something no one else could fully understand. Every Saturday, we made a ritual of it. Breakfast at the same corner diner, then long walks through the park where the air always seemed a little cleaner. Sometimes we'd talk about everything. Other times, we'd talk about nothing. Tomatoes in the garden, a funny-looking squirrel, old songs and new books. One afternoon, as we planted tulip bulbs in the backyard, her hands dirted, her hair tied back in a bandana, I paused, leaned on the shovel, and said it. "You saved me." She glanced up, puzzled. "Emma, you saw what no one else did. You said something when most would have stayed quiet. You got me out. You saved my life." She looked down for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You saved mine first. I just gave it back. I never forgot that." Later that year, I rewrote my will. Not out of revenge. Not to punish David. Life had already seen to that. But out of clarity. I left everything to Emma. not because she had earned it, but because she had honored it. She had shown the kind of love that doesn't expect reward, only safety. I also started volunteering at a local mentorship program for troubled teens. Most of them had no fathers. Some had too many bad examples and not enough good ones. I told them my story, piece by piece, not to scare them, but to remind them that love, when it's silent too long, can turn bitter. Some listened, some didn't, but I showed up every week because someone should. The scar David left didn't disappear, but with time, it softened. And in its place, something stronger began to grow. Not hate, not bitterness, but understanding. You can't choose how someone loves you, but you can choose what you do with what's left. It didn't take long before the story spilled beyond courtroom walls and into the glare of public scrutiny. Local entrepreneur arrested for alleged murder plot against father. Motive: insurance money. The headline blazed across screens the next morning, accompanied by a somber photo of David in handcuffs, his eyes cast down, his face no longer the polished mask he wore at charity galas. News outlets picked it up across the state, morning shows, podcasts, even late-night comedy. Everyone had something to say. The once respected businessman, the doting son-turned suspect, the family torn apart by greed. And as for me, reporters camped outside my front yard. Microphones shoved at me in grocery store parking lots. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Everyone wanted a statement, a quote, a soundbite, something to feed the hungry media cycle. But I gave them just one line. I stood in front of my house, beside the very tulips Emma and I had planted, and read from a folded piece of paper. Sometimes, love isn't enough to cure cruelty. Sometimes, blood isn't thick enough to drown out truth. But silence can be fatal. I'm alive today because one brave young woman chose not to stay silent. That's the only story worth telling. Then I turned around and walked back inside. I never spoke to the press again. Emma, however, became a quiet symbol of courage. Her name wasn't made public, but word found its way to the right people. A national foundation that supported teenage whistleblowers reached out to her. They read the sealed court documents. They spoke with school officials and counselors. And within a month, Emma received a full scholarship to the university of her choice, a recognition not just of her bravery, but of her character. She didn't boast about it. She didn't even post about it. When I asked her how she felt, she smiled and said, "I didn't do it for this." But it feels like a light got turned on after a long storm. The world, it seemed, had noticed what I had known all along. She wasn't just the girl who saved my life. She was the girl who reminded me how to live it again. A year passed like a slow turning page, each day peeling away a little more of the weight, though never quite the scar. On a quiet spring morning, I visited the place I hadn't returned to in years. The cemetery was peaceful, dappled in soft light from the trees above. Wind stirred gently through the rows of headstones, carrying the scent of earth and blooming jasmine. I walked alone, past names I barely recognized, until I stood at the familiar one etched in stone. Margaret Elaine Harper, beloved wife, fierce spirit, gentle soul. I knelt down and laid a single white lily beside the headstone, her favorite flower. The petals trembled slightly in the breeze, like they too remembered her laugh. I rested my hand on the cool marble and let the silence stretch. I used to wonder if we raised him right, I said, my voice quiet. If the mistakes were mine, if I should have seen it coming. A pause, the rustle of trees above. Our son lost his way, I whispered. But our granddaughter, she carries your fire. I smiled faintly, tracing the edge of her name. You would have been so proud of her, Margaret. She didn't just save me. She saved herself, too. She didn't let the darkness win. I stood there for a long while before turning to leave, the soft crunch of gravel beneath my feet marking each step forward. That afternoon, under a blue sky strung with sunlight, Emma walked across the stage in a deep green robe, her cap tilted slightly off-center, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. I stood and clapped until my palms ached. She took the MIC with a poise I hadn't seen before. Her voice was steady. There are people who build your life quietly, she said. People who show up even when it's hard. My grandfather was one of them. When I was scared, he listened. When I was alone, he stood beside me. And when I had to make the hardest decision of my life, I trusted him. Her eyes met mine again, and he trusted me. The crowd applauded, unaware of the full weight her words carried. But we knew. We didn't need the world to understand. As the applause swelled and cameras flashed, I looked at her, radiant, strong, unshaken, and felt something inside me settle. A quiet peace, a closed circle, and as the screen fades to black, the voiceover echoes one final truth. Trust isn't just a gift. Sometimes, it's the line between life and death.